Welcome, everyone, to the Culinary Now podcast. My name is Matt Britt.
And I'm Jamie Schick.
And today we are joined by a very special guest, actually, someone who Jamie and I went to graduate school with, Chef Jeff Alexander. And we're going to be talking all about ancient grains, how they apply to sort of modern kitchens, and why they are just what you should be using. So, Jeff, welcome to the pod.
Hello, how's it going, everybody?
Going well.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, we're super excited to talk to you. I mean, we talk all the time, but it's nice to actually formally record. Before we get started, why don't you just give us like a quick elevator pitch on who you are, what you do, and why you're the person we should talk to about ancient grains?
Okay. Well, I am a professional pastry chef by trade, and after years of doing that, I got really into the magic of bread chemistry and bread magic. And I started from not really a starting place of being taught this. So I started out with books, found it absolutely fascinating. And then I really realized there was such a different distinction between pastry and bread, even though they're similar. There's so much knowledge that has to go into so many different areas, from the farmer all the way to the final fermentation of these loaves and how you work with them. And it's just something that really can't be replicated when I make a cake. So I love that. I love that aspect of it.
And I think having both sets of knowledge as a pastry chef and a baker puts you in a really unique position in our industry, because you can see things from both sides. And I know that one of your passions is ancient grains, and you use them a lot in your classes and in your curriculum. So can you tell us a little bit about what an ancient grain is?
Sure. When you think the word ancient, I mean, you right away think it's going to be old. So that's kind of the basis of this. And ancient grains are a classification of grains that were the original grain before they've gotten a hold of and gotten GMO'd, which is the majority of the wheat that we're going to find today in most of the grocery shelves. So ancient grains have never been touched. They're as true to their genetics as they were 1,000 years ago. So,
And
with that comes so much more, which I'm sure we'll discuss.
So, what's funny is I think when I hear the word ancient or old and, not genetically modified, it almost sounds like those are really hard to acquire. You wouldn't necessarily come across these, but some of these grains are pretty commonplace in most professional kitchens, right? Can you give us a list of like some grains that like fall into this category?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's kind of two classifications going on. They'll call it ancient grains, and then there's also heirloom varieties. And to me, they are similar, maybe not the same. The ancient grain, some really classifications of ancient grains would include one of my favorites, which is einkorn wheat. This was it was found in the stomach of a caveman that they found entombed in ice. And they did an autopsy and right away discovered einkorn wheat in the caveman's stomach. So that is a true original grain. And then the heirloom varieties, which are grown in the U.S., are all varieties of wheat, but we don't have a lot of access to those unless you go out and source them. And thank goodness for the internet, because you can source them now. I just don't think there's a lot of public awareness. So I'm going to get back to these ancient grains. So we have einkorn, which is very popular and finding its way in many publications these days, which is fantastic because that's going to raise the awareness and hopefully get some farmers to start planting more of this relatively easy to grow grain here in the United States. Kamut wheat, which is a very gorgeous golden flour. And this is actually the parent plant of all of today's durum wheat, which makes all the pasta. So they had to GMO that kamut so that it could get bigger, mold resistant, pest resistant, everything to make more, and totally have changed that kamut grain and kind of hybridized out some of its flavor. So going with a real kamut is fantastic. We have spelt flour, which is the original parent plant of all of today's whole wheat flour that you find on the market. And then another popular one is known as emmer flour. And emmer is also known as farro in many culinary applications. And once again, a variety of wheat. So those are kind of the ancients. And then here in America, we have varieties known as red fife wheat. And in comparison to what is grown by the rest of the U.S., this was the original wheat grain before it became GMO'd by the Industrial Revolution. Red fife, turkey, Sonoma white, which grows in Arizona locally. I mean, I could keep going. It's just so, to me, fascinating and magical that there's also this heirloom varieties that exist right here in our own backyard, and people are still growing them, and the public awareness is getting out there. Bakeries are utilizing them and definitely starting to showcase them a bit more, not all of them. So hopefully that was a decent explanation of what you were looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too some of the reasons why people may want to use these flowers would be flavor, texture, nutrition, because all of these different grains, they're all offering different attributes in those categories. So when people are looking to start incorporating any of these into their baking, what are some guidelines you might give them to start experimenting if they're interested in these?
Okay, yeah, they are very different from my experience. When I first started introducing these ancient grain varieties, and quite personally, I've never worked with them, so I had to come from a pre-knowledge base of what I had already known, which is obviously some whole wheat breads, a lot of white floured type breads, and then my knowledge of rye. So between wheat and rye, they are very different feelings. So I was able to figure out that just by watching and feeling and touching. So when I got introduced to these new grains, I didn't come from a knowledge point really, and that's usually the fun part that I like to do on purpose is to just mix together that grain made into flour with some water, and right away I can start to tell, does it have gluten content like what I'm used to? Or is it much more mealy and has very little gluten content? And then I know how to work with that grain a lot more. So that's one aspect that I utilize just in my journey alone. Now, if you take class with me, I can save you all that journey because I've been there already and I know a lot more now. Um, to your point of like textures and flavors and nutritional value, I'm not sure if you even mentioned nutritional value, and I hope that we're going to get there because these grains are highly nutritious and they are more nutritious than what is currently on the market. Do they have more flavor? Yes, they do. Very, very bold flavor and sometimes surprisingly bold, and it catches people off guard because you got to realize that the most of the public has their idea of what bread is. So that when they get these different grains, it's a very different feeling for them, especially if only you have ever ate white bread in your life and you go to one of these hearty loaves. It can be overwhelming for some people. So with these nutritional values, they're incredible. They're absolutely incredible, and you just can't. You got to realize, you got to make the connection that just because they're highly nutritious, does not mean that you're going to be more nutritious. And I think that's a bold point because it matters on how it's then processed for your body to be able to absorb those nutrients that you have now paid extra money for. So that's a conversation maybe in a few moments that we should absolutely get to.
Yeah,
For
Um,
sure. For
yeah.
sure. And I think that you made some great points, and I think we are going to head there. But just to kind of circle back to the beginning of like of my question, if I'm like interested in using like spelt, emmer, kamut, like, and I never have before, but I don't have your knowledge, I don't have your years of experience. Could I sub in 20% of my flour and see how my recipe goes? Like, is that a good guideline, or should I go more, less?
Well, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're coming from a white bread background, then 20% is a very mild starting point, which will alter your loaf slightly and start to introduce some minimal amounts of flavor without necessarily changing the formula at all. Now, there's only one flour in particular, the kamut flour, which will absorb up to 15% more water than your average white bread flour. So that might be one consideration to take into effect, but there is lots of documentation via the internet that will also kind of highlight those things. So you could get caught off guard if you use the wrong grain, right?
Mm-hmm.
You may notice, what are you going to notice that might be different? Could be looser, may seem to be stickier. Could be actually firmer in the case I was just talking about. So 20% is a very safe way to incorporate this. Now, will you pull out the majority of that flavor? No, because the other 80% is going to be your white flour. So we try to shoot a little bit more boldly when we utilize these ancient grains so that, they actually make an impact. For a bread label, that sounds great, kamut bread, but and only 20% of it is kamut. So I feel that there's some misleading moments there as well.
Mm-hmm.
A great starting point to kind of figure out how things go, and then you can start to adjust more. And you'll see as you start to adjust more of these types of ancient grains or heirloom wheats into your mixtures and recipes that they're going to very much change. They're going to become denser. You're not going to get the same oven spring that you're used to because gluten quality is a lot lower.
So that's so interesting. And I think you alluded to this in what you just said is that, different grains have different sort of benefits, right? Like some grains are better for certain things. And I know you're like a master with sourdough. My question is there like kind of a cheat sheet you could give us where you would say, okay, this grain is actually best for this type of bread, this grain for this type of bread? Because I think are there any ancient grains that don't have any gluten in them?
No.
Oh,
If it's well, of course, let's not get it twisted because ancient grains can involve other varieties other than wheat. When we're speaking about the category of wheat, there's always going to be some gluten content involved.
mm,
Obviously, at a much lower rate than what we're used to. But yeah, is there other ancient grains? Yeah, I'm sure we've all heard of quinoa.
yep.
Right? We've all heard of maybe not teff, which is one of the smallest grains in the world, but has a tremendous high protein content, used extensively throughout Africa and mainly Ethiopia. They make all their flatbreads from this. So yes, there is gluten-free alternatives in the ancient grain world, but you are getting real far away from if you're trying to make a loaf of bread.
All right, so let's stick with bread and let's stick with sourdough. How would you normally do it? And then if you wanted to kind of flip the script and go ancient grain style, how, because you're not doing 20%, you're going the whole shebang. What
Well,
ancient grain would you use as an alternative?
what ancient grains would I use? Okay, well, I mean, so for the use of what I want, if I wanted something that was similar to what the public is used to, I would absolutely recommend that you would go for the kamut flour. That has a great oven spring. It meshes and mimics what you're somewhat used to, but the texture is very different in your mouth, but it still is bread-like. It does have a high protein content, which means that the gluten is very acceptable to utilize that grain in a 100% format. Just straight out swap. Now, when I try to do something like 100% einkorn, that bread comes out brickish, quite dense. Is it good? Is it delicious? Yeah, it makes amazing. Like I love it in a toast format. But those that know me know that I bake bread so that I can make toast. That's one of my favorite sayings. I feel like toast really brings out the magic in a lot of loaves. So you do need to know the handling and the characteristics of what this comes out in a final product. Now, as a cheat sheet, I mean, you could, what would I say? Yeah, kamut. spelt flour. Spelt flour also makes a very, very nice loaf at 100% exchange. But when I start working with the einkorn and the emmers, we're really starting to get down into a much lower protein content with these. And when we're talking, just for reference, we're dealing with maybe around 5% protein in an emmer or einkorn, which is comparable to our cake flour that's commonly used in the US. It has gluten, but it's quite weak. And when you're lacking that gluten structure, you're not able to trap gases. And that gas that I'm speaking of is carbon dioxide from the sourdough process. And if it can't trap the gases, the dough cannot rise. And you will always have a loaf that is dense and heavy. Amazing keeping qualities, for sure. But it can be a tough one for people to just come right out the gate and try because it's so far from what you're used to. So when I start to incorporate my weaker gluten and ancient grains, I have to do a backup. I utilize natural techniques such as pre-ferments, or known as levains, which is the sourdough process. I make them very, very firm, these doughs. And when they sit overnight, they develop these organic acids that further strengthen gluten that I could never replicate in a one-day moment. So that's with my techniques, I'm able to build further strength into these doughs that typically wouldn't be there. And then quite often we will back it up with a certain percentage of a white wheat, a quality white wheat flour, to give it that gluten content that it needs. So you got to know your market, I would say. There's going to be people that want that 100% einkorn, for sure. And then there's going to be people that are like, whew, no way, that's too much. And we have other lighter versions. And, between the baker and you and the person at home that's working with this, I would say have fun. Document your recordings, take pictures, and come up with a blend that works really, really well for you. There's already documented formulas that do work, and I feel like that's how every baker would probably begin. Start from something that you like and works, and then you can start to make tweaks, and that's how you start to really understand the grain characteristics.
That was so good. I learned a lot and I made a lot of really a lot of connections while you were talking. You're talking about the protein content of cake flour being similar to some of these ancient grains. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if you just look at the protein content, you could probably easily find how you can sub things in based on that. And I'm thinking from a pastry brain, of course, and I'd love to talk a little bit more about how we can utilize these ancient grains in other areas, not just in bread baking, but in pastry or culinary applications. So my brain was like, oh my gosh, the proteins, if I just line them up, I could be like, wow, that one's super similar. I bet I could replace almost all of it and get a similar result. So my
Yeah.
brain was going when you said that. And that was such like a light bulb. But anyway, let's talk about
That's the connection you just made there, and you brought it to my attention at the same point. You're 100% correct. By having knowledge of the background information of the grain, it allows you to be more knowledgeable about what you can sub moving forward. And if it's like, hey, that pie dough has pastry flour in it, which is common, I can absolutely sub out an ancient grain in here and at 100% rate and come up with something that's so different from a white pie dough.
but would be like structurally similar
Oh yeah,
because of the same it just that's just the way my pastry brain works. So let's kind of talk about and go down what are some other applications besides bread baking that we could use ancient grains in, whether culinary or on the pastry side.
okay.
Culinary.
I think on the
I
on the
said or on
culinary,
the pastry side. We could do
I'm
both.
I'm just going to speak on the culinary side real quick because culinarians should need to be all over these grains because you can get these grains in a whole berry format. When you cook these things like you would cook rice, they plump up so gorgeous. They have so much pop and snap in your mouth as a textural component when combined with whatever cucumbers and herbs and tomatoes. but just absolutely fantastic sub out. You could do risottos with these
Yeah,
grains.
farro, yeah.
You could put this on salads. This could be made into a granola bar. This could this could go into beverages, right? I mean,
Yeah.
why aren't the beer makers messing with these grains yet?
Oh, they must be. They must be
Well,
at
it
this
might
point.
be, but you're not hearing about
You're
it.
not
It's
hearing it.
happening somewhere locally. But that's just a whole nother market for the beverage industry to expand into with just some new ideas, right?
Yeah,
Now
yeah,
on the pastry side, um, Jamie, you and I think a lot alike because I've been primarily into the teaching of artisan bread baking for a good bit of time, but my brain is still very pastry minded, and I often speak to my baking students because I know where they're going next. If they're going to pastry class, I'm already saying, hey, don't forget about this because you could swap this out and use this for senior buffet to really bring an impact and some knowledge coming from another source, from another class. So in the pastry world, oof, gotta love it. Cookies all day long. Cookies are a fantastic medium to bring your ancient grains into with very little, if none, of a quality issue. Let's say from what you're used to. I mean, obviously, with a little bit of trial and error, I never bake 30 cookies at one time. I always bake one, see how it went. If it didn't do what I wanted to do, then I make some adjustments, whether it's oven temperature or push it down more or leave it alone, so on and so forth. But you'll figure it out once you get there. Bring it into cakes, bring it into sponges, bring it into ways of grinding own fresh flour, roasting that flour, adding a flavor component to crumbles and streusels.
Mm. That's super easy because there's very little like you can mess up with a crumble and a streusel.
Right. What I've noticed the most when it comes to in the pastry world is that it seems like the less moisture that's in the recipe, the ancient grains shine greater.
Mm,
Um, does that translate?
I think so. I think
Let's say,
so.
I mean, just for example purposes, like an einkorn sponge cake is may perform very differently and taste and feel differently because you know what a cake's supposed to taste like. But when you start to deal with things that have lower hydration, that have crispier end results,
Mm.
this is when I believe the ancient grain is at its like top peak. Just that crispy meshed with that deep profile flavor and the caramelization that comes about. And this is why I feel like cookies and our pâte brisées and our pâte sablés will shine 100%.
All right, I love this cookie idea. So, what if I list a few common cookies and you give your thoughts of which ancient grain you think would work best in it? Flavor wise, texture wise, let's just throw some stuff out there. Also, I could really go for a cookie right now, so
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
we'll stay on this cookie train. All right, so what about let's just start with the classic chocolate chip. What ancient grain do you think would work best in that?
Okay, chocolate chips. Oh boy, I don't have just one. I already have known in my life that whole wheat flour does well in a chocolate chip cookie. So once I had the moments to grab these heirloom varieties of wheats, whole wheat flour comes in beautifully.
All right, what about
These air,
snickerdoodle?
huh?
What about snickerdoodle? I'm going to rapid fire these.
Yeah. I won't comment too much though. But any kind of wheats, spelt is very very nice. Your einkorn is going to be fabulous in that because it's actually going to because those have more robust flavors that will pop a little bit more with that chocolate amount that's in that cookie. That's why I would choose that one.
All right, so snickerdoodle.
Snickerdoodle, I would go with a kamut flour or like a Sonora white.
Oh. What about a ginger molasses cookie?
Okay, well, right off the bat, I mean, when you say ginger molasses, I'm thinking heavy, dark tone flavors. I'm going to want to utilize a flour that can match up to that situation, and this is why I wouldn't choose a kamut because the kamut is one of the least flavorful. So I'm definitely thinking whole grain on this one, where I'm going back to einkorns. I'm going back to my red fifes.
What about Rye would probably be good in that too.
Oh yeah. I can't believe I've been sleeping on rye. I've been on this wheat kick. Rye, rye works in so many cookies.
All right,
Rye works in so many cookies.
one last one. Peanut butter.
Peanut butter.
Like a
Ooh.
peanut butter cookie.
Well, peanut butter is so dominant that I don't know if anything would pop through. That would be a crapshoot. That's a little bit of a tough one for me. I think I'd probably go into a kamut for a peanut butter.
Because you're not trying to overtake the flavor. You just want something that's neutral.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'll ever be able to overtake the flavor, though.
Yeah, no.
I kind of want something that would just sort of complement that cookie in a more nutritious way. Because I wouldn't want to say this is my einkorn peanut butter, and someone goes, all I taste is peanut butter, and I would agree with them.
I do love a peanut butter cookie though. That's now if I had to choose a cookie right now, that would be it.
Yeah.
Chef, you mentioned something earlier and you said we were going to get back to it, but I think this is a good time to maybe pivot just on sort of the nutrition benefits of ancient grains, whole wheat grains in general. Again, whether that's through the fermentation process, the sourdough process, where do you think the most important place to start is when we talk about the relationship of an ancient grain with sort of nutrition? Knowing that it's not going to make you healthier, how does that relationship exist?
Okay. Well, I think everybody needs to understand one term, and that's known as phytic acid.
Okay. What is
Okay.
phytic acid?
Phytic acid is a naturally occurring compound that only applies to 4 categories of our food world, and that would involve grains, that's going to involve legumes, that's going to involve seeds. I'm missing one. Nuts. Sorry, nuts. Okay, so grains, seeds, nuts, legumes. All these things have natural phytic acid as part of the natural way that they grow. Now, the issue with phytic acid for when the human body consumes it is that it locks up nutrients that are in that particular food. Let's say a walnut. So you eat a raw walnut, but you're also consuming phytic acid. And phytic acid also locks these nutrients up and makes them unavailable for the body to absorb this nutrition. So, so is phytic acid the enemy? In some regards, yes, but also there's research that suggests that phytic acid is also good for antioxidants. But I think in the long run, phytic acid is the big one that's hurting people's digestibility. And that's where phytic acid comes in, is that it really causes indigestibility. So to destroy the phytic acid, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. It all happens naturally through the sourdough process, not through the use of commercial yeast. It's not enough time. So there's a couple ways I know to break down phytic acid. So fermentation is one of them, utilizing a sourdough culture. The other one is soaking. All right, so simply soaking walnuts overnight is going to create an enzyme that's going to be woken up. It's known as phytase. Phytase, what do you think it fights? Phytic acid. That's right. So by just introducing water in an overnight process, you are already starting to unlock things and introducing phytase, which breaks down phytic acid. Now, phytase also occurs during the natural sourdough process. And then the only other way I know to break down phytic acid is known as sprouting grains. So you can take whole grains, add your water, let them sit overnight the way that you would typically sprout a grain, and that process will develop phytase. So that's the technical side of this, which I explain to my students in a very approachable way. Pretty much how you heard it right there. If you heard that from somebody else, it could sound like, whoo, like really just go right over your head. And you're like, are we still talking about bread over here?
What's interesting is you talked about soaking grains and sprouting them. I've actually heard that doing that makes them easier to digest.
Oh, 100%, because you just made the connection of what I just said. What does it do? right? It releases phytase. Phytase breaks down phytic acid. Now, when you go to consume that, it's easier to digest because your body does not have to work nearly as hard to even try to get to those nutrients.
I see, I've heard it mainly about oatmeal, so it's really interesting because they sell like sprouted oats. It's really interesting that you're saying it can be almost any grain.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Or legume.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. It's like, my brain it's a little slow to get started to make these connections, but it's really interesting to understand the reasoning why behind like these things that I've heard, such as like the digesting of sprouted grains. It's nice to understand the science behind it.
Sure. Yeah, because nature's doing a majority of the work for you. And this is, I'll just jump ahead just for a second, but this is why you see so many gluten intolerances this day, due to the fact that people aren't eating fantastic bread from a child and they continue these habits with them. And then all of a sudden they got this indigestibility. And when they're little like that, they immediately get labeled as gluten intolerant and the fear walls go up and the knowledge stops. There's hope. There's
So
hope for those that love gluten.
I'm so happy you kind of took that turn because I do think this is something I feel passionate about is, and maybe you can talk about it a little bit more about how sort of the ancient grain, these sort of untouched varietals might just be better for like society. Like if how do we inundate culture and show the benefits of these, whether it's an allergen relationship or as you mentioned, the digestible relationship. How do you think the market should, sort of promote ancient grains? Do you think that there's a way they can do that from an allergen standpoint is what I'm trying to get to?
Oh boy, that's a that's a question that has bigger strings pulling over top of
For
it.
sure.
You ever hear of what's known as big wheat?
No. No, I don't want big wheat to know me, so I try and stay clear.
Yeah, well, big wheat is going to try to, like stomp this idea out. So getting it on a nationally recognized level is not something that would happen right out the gate. I'm part of the Bread Bakers Guild of America, which is the leading organization anywhere really for artisan bread. And where am I going with this? Help me out here.
No, it's what you're saying is it's a bigger task
No,
than
yeah,
what the question I had.
it's difficult. I mean, I would say the most grassroots approach at this point is going to be to find a great local bakery that specializes in sourdough and artisan breads. There is where you're going to start to find because these bakers want to challenge themselves as well.
Yeah.
And when we start to hear about grains that we've never heard about, our ears start to get, a little twitchy. We're like, okay.
So on that, I mean, and you're in the Pawtucket area, you work in Providence. We have a lot of students, a lot of young professionals that listen to this that are in the same vicinity. Where can they find, like if you had to point them in a direction of someone who's doing it right, where should they go locally or even more broadly if you want to go farther out, but like where can they find these like really great bread bakers?
I think America, the United States of America, is on the forefronts of utilizing these new types of grains. So the U.S. period is going to be some of your best shots right here locally in Providence. To give a shout out to one of the better bakeries around here, and that's known as Seven Stars Bakery.
Yeah.
And they will quite often run specialty breads with these heirloom flours. Now, they have to educate their customers, as I would educate them as well, because what are the customers going to see? They're going to notice that bread's more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it more expensive? Because it didn't come from big wheat. These are grown in small crop batches. Obviously, through supply and demand, when you have less of something and people want it, and not to mention, remember, it's an ancient heirloom grain. They've never been bred to create more. So even the output that we get from growing these heirloom crops is significantly less from the GMO variety that produces 2.5 times the original weight.
Yeah.
So, but that also promotes biodiversity, right?
Yeah. So it
Yeah.
sounds like it's a good problem to have is to go look for the local person who's not producing a ton of bread, but is doing it with these really creative ancient grains and experimenting, which is what you said a bread baker loves to do, and to give them a little bit of love and support them, even though it might be a little more expensive, if you can. That's obviously great.
Right. I mean, if I was the bakery owner, I would give it away for free in a sample format. That would be the number one way that I would do it. You got to educate the customers, and they don't want to hear the words first. All they want to do is look at it and taste it, and then if they're like, wow, that's a really, really dense item. And then if you come back and say, wow, well, look at all these benefits from it, then maybe they can say, you know what, I could handle that. But is it worth it to them?
Yeah,
Is
and
it?
I'm hoping that these conversations that we'll see more ancient grains in the forefront of like mass market, mass produced, kind of like we
Yeah.
saw with sourdough, where you can buy it at like the regular grocery store, where consumers will start to taste it and be familiar with it, and then be a little bit more adventurous going out to local bakeries and trying a much better version of what can be mass produced. So hopefully just education and continuing talking about them and using them in different applications, just as you said, educating our customer, but also exposure to the different grains and just constantly seeing them and hearing about them and always having them in our products, pastry, savory, bread baking, whatever it might be.
Where I think you might see it first, and this is just a prediction. I think the first national exposure that we'll see of ancient grains will come in the form of breakfast cereal.
Yeah, I can see that. Think about like the Kashi brand. I think
Mm-hmm.
they already like I think are headed in that direction. So
But
I
yeah,
think you're
they're
right.
already utilizing sorghum and starting to branch out and utilize these grains, and that'll be a fantastic thing because once it hits the cereal, now you got a lot of eyes on it. And now it's a buzzword in their head. And then if they show up to the local bakery and see this, they're like, you know what? Let me give that a try.
It's also a sneaky way to get it into mass consumption because,
Oh
once
yeah,
you pour that milk on the cereal, you're not thinking about the grain that's in the cereal. You're thinking about just getting through your day.
yeah. You're thinking about many things. Is it going to go soggy quick?
Oh, no.
Yeah, like how fast do I need to eat this? Until you learn your cereal.
We can do a whole episode on why we hate soggy cereal. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, this also clicks back to, in my think, the best way to use these ancient grains is in a crispier application
Mm.
to really get the best flavor profiles out of them. And cereal hits that mark right on the head.
You could argue that crackers would also be a really good way to kind of mass
Crackers,
produce it.
yeah, I mean, when I think of crackers, I mean, I mentioned pie dough several times. Um, you can just make a whole grain pie dough, roll it out thin, sprinkle your favorite seasonings on top, and that will be a dynamite buttery cracker.
Yeah, that's a good tip right there.
And that's just a straight up swap out.
Yep.
No problems. If it's a little dry, squirt a little water in it. It's a cracker.
Yeah.
Right?
I like
Well,
how,
thank you so much for your time today. We had a blast chatting about all things, like literally all things ancient grains. If is there a place? Do you have things coming up? Like what's in the horizon? Anything you want to promote to our listeners?
Yeah, sure. I have an exciting opportunity. This is an event that I've done for the last 2 years, and I'm honored that they have invited me back. I am going to be one of three judges at the Elmendorf Parish Street Fair in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
ooh,
Oh, cool.
So this is an incredible moment for the public. They opened this competition up to home bakers and another category of professional home bakers or serious home bakers. Then they have categories. So this year's category is seeded whole grain sandwich bread.
ooh.
And then the other one is going to be a sourdough boule, just a classic sourdough boule, which means the round shape.
Put some clam
Um,
chowder in that baby. Let's go.
that's right. That's right. In the past, I have sampled over 100 breads in one day when it was the category was sourdough and baguettes. And baguettes can be challenging to make at home. So after a couple of years of doing baguettes, we switched it up to the seeded sandwich loaf this year.
Nice.
So that's quite the honor because this attracts some of the best of the best in the Northeast. I see many great baking friends that show up to the event. They block off the streets in Cambridge. They have everything France, crepe, yeah, everything. It's a day in France. So if you're around, and that is on June 28th, I believe.
Nice.
Quick internet search will confirm that. That's the Elmendorf Paris Street Fair. And one other event that I would like to, or not would like to, I'm planning on attending at the end and beginning of August is the kneading conference. The
What is
kneading conference, like literally,
it?
the
Like
kneading.
KNEAD.
Yeah, but this and you'll like this, Chef Britt. It is in Skowhegan, Maine.
Ooh, I'm a Mainer at heart, so I love it.
Yeah, Maynard and Hart. So that event, I'm looking to make some really good connections and contacts there that I can bring back with me into the classroom environment. I'm really trying to seek out some. I don't know a lot of these farmers who are having this small crop stuff, and I would love to make a connection and potentially even have them in as guest speakers because there's so much that I do not know about ancient grains.
It sounds.
All I know is that the person who grows that grain puts a lot of time and knowledge into that. And if it's given to somebody on the other end that doesn't respect that, then you're not getting the most out of that grain. You have to know your sourdoughs. You have to know your techniques. You have to understand dough handling to bring that grain into its best light. So that's the way I look at it. This took a long time to grow. I'm certainly not going to disrespect it, and I want to do the best for it.
True words of wisdom from someone who does know quite a bit about ancient grains, even though you said you don't. But we appreciate your humbleness, and we appreciate you taking some time to join us from your garden, which looks beautiful, Jeff. So
Thank you.
you have a fantastic rest of your day, man.
Right. Thank you so much, y'all.